Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a very special guest today, Dave Hurt. I just did your show last week. It was fun. Enjoyed it. Good conversation. I voted today, and I wore this to vote. It says all politicians are cunts. And then I posted a picture of myself voting to celebrate my civic, doing my civic duty. And Instagram took that post down and said it was hate speech because calling politicians cunts is hate speech, but calling all conservatives Nazis and all cops bastards is not, apparently. So it's a good way to start off the day.
Yeah, man, I was a little butthurt for a second because I reposted that and then it disappeared and I was like, that son of a bitch took it down. He took my repost down.
I never take anything down. I enjoy.
Yeah, I should have known better.
I enjoy the hilarity of doing dumb shit and being shit talked for it. It's one of my favorite things. It's actually so Ross, my co-host on Drinking Bros, he never reads any of the comments. I read all the comments because I always want to see if somebody says something really funny. You know what I mean? I don't really care about being shit talked. It's fun for me. So, yeah, I like it.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, an acquired ability. At least it has been for me, just realizing that these people don't really know me. Just read all of these comments for what they are, just something to treat like a spectacle, and then it doesn't bother you. But I think in the beginning, I let some of that stuff get to me just because I didn't even realize fully how this thing works, this machine of people sounding off in fake reality, things that they would never really say to you. So now I read some of the comments and I just laugh. I mean, dude, I get called a white supremacist every day, even though I'm married to a person of color, which is just hilarious.
You do look like you may have been at January 6th. So fair enough.
Oh,
right?
Dude, absolutely. My friend, Maj Touré, probably Black Guns Matter.
Yeah.
That's what he says. He's like, dude, just look at you. He's like, if I was a leftist, I would think that you're a white supremacist. So I'm like, all right, fair, touche.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think he might be a white supremacist, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, he's the black face of white supremacy. I think next in line behind Larry Elder.
Yeah, Elder's doing commercials for vitamins now, so I'm not sure what's up with that guy.
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyways, so this show, as we discussed on yours, I just want to, lead us back in here. We talk about, I guess we brush up against politics, but I think, politics is just the expression, the collective expression of what's really going on behind the scenes, which is that, certain groups of people in concert with the collective complacency and laziness and cowardice of America have seen fit to try to attack and destroy all the institutions that protect us, right? So, the rule of law, masculinity, things like this. There's been and police and military. There's been a concerted effort over the past several years, I guess, maybe decades, to do just that, to I guess, tear at the underbelly of, the foundation of what makes this country what it is and what makes any country, I guess, capable of having advanced political and philosophical discussions to come to a place where most people are generally satisfied, right? You can't do that if there's the goddamn Thunderdome going on.
Right.
Now, the conspiratorial side of me will point to that Russian agent, Yuri, whatever the fuck his name was, who was like, yeah, he pretty much laid out the groundwork of how the Soviet Union was trying to take us down from the inside out, which is to say, demasculinize and all this other stuff. But, Hanlon's razor says you don't have to imply malice when incompetence will suffice. And while there has been quite a bit of demonstrable malice, our incompetence is what has allowed this to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a perfect storm of malice and incompetence that's got us where we are today. And on top of that, like you just said, people who do try to have reasonable conversations about these things are met with the swift fist of censorship. And I mean, just like you putting your post up today, that should be completely acceptable. One thing we should be able to do as a society is make fun of ourselves.
Mm.
And I think politics, when you started this, you said politics is something that we brush up against often in these conversations. But I think a lot about like what actually is politics, right? It's just us talking about how we do things as a society, really. So it's kind of part of everything. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of realized that I used to shy away from politics in these types of issues, but much like religion, I find that embracing it and talking about it has been beneficial to my life. So, yeah, man, it is, I think, a perfect storm of those two things: incompetence and malice. But I don't know how to tease the two apart. I don't know, except to talk about it, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, you sure you do, right? Because it's the hole in the bucket situation. It's like the bucket's made to hold water and it's not functioning properly because there are holes in it, and that's on us to fix that. Like we blame the water, we blame the guy pouring the water, we'll blame everything except for the actual fucking issue, right?
Right.
Because if we zero in on the actual issue, then we bear some responsibility for fixing that issue. And I think that's something that people have a problem with. It's why people, the bystander effect, it's why people will avert their eyes when somebody else nearby them is in crisis because they don't want to accept the responsibility to fix that shit.
Yeah.
Which is the wrong answer, right? And you get that you're sowing a particular seed in that moment, and what you reap is the world that we're living in today.
Yeah, I saw it a lot with my former peers and contemporaries in the sciences. So my background is in biochemistry. So a lot of my friends slash former friends, people who don't want to associate with me anymore, except for in private these days, were acknowledging a lot of the issues I was very public about when it came to these vaccines and mandates and things like that. They were acknowledging it to me privately. However, the exact thing you just said, they were afraid to acknowledge it publicly because then they had some responsibility, and also they would face this backlash. Several of them told me straight up, look, man, I'm afraid I'll lose my funding from the NSF or the NIH. And that's what was happening with all of that. And then those of us who did speak up, I mean, I have a lot of friends from my time in grad school and then when I was working as a research scientist who just deleted me from social media. They're afraid to say they're friends with me and all this stuff when I'm just saying very reasonable things that they agree with in private. So it's unfortunate, man. People have lost their testicular fortitude.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what these bad. It's why I say refer to the confluence of these things because that's what the bad actors depend on. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
it's like leaving. It's like parking your car on the street with $100 bill on the dash. What do you expect is going to happen? You know what I mean? It's one of the things that we discussed on your show the other day, the is-ought dilemma, which is to say there is the way the world is and there is the way the world ought to be. The ought to be is a decent, I guess, map to try to figure out how to get from is, to a better place. Mm-hmm. But simply pretending like ought is reality is very detrimental to the process of, just going through day-to-day life. It's Carl Sagan said, to me, it's far better to accept the universe as it is rather than persist in delusion, regardless of how gratifying it might be. And we are very delusional these days. And I think the core delusion that a lot of people have is that I can go about my life and trust other people to take care of everything. You know what I mean? Which is the wrong answer. It's just not. That's not how anything has ever worked. Just like, your education, your job, or your family, or a skill, hobby, whatever it is, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And if your idea of self-governance is just to go to the ballot box and check all the R's or all the D's, or learn everything you know about conservatives from CNN or everything you know about liberals from Fox News, then you have failed at the very basic duty of being a citizen, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I certainly agree with you, man. And the is ought thing is interesting. I thought about that a lot after we spoke about it, and I think that to some extent, obviously, without the ought, there isn't something to strive for in some regards, right? Because the moral framework through which you operate, whether it's one of religious or just one of basic human decency that you think is intrinsic to us as a species, since we sort of transcended just limbic system control, right? We have this advanced cortex, and so now we have this stuff like morality, et cetera. The a lot of that is based on ought, right? You ought not steal, you ought not rape, you ought not murder. So I think that, because I was a little conflicted after we spoke, to be honest, because I approach everything, my show included, as I'm just a student of all of this, trying to learn from guys like you and other people. And I was like, well, shit, man, without some ought, what am I striving for? But I think where we have failed is just our ought is now this delusional postmodern bullshit. And that's where essentially those who would have us crumble as a society have succeeded at infiltrating institutions of higher learning, dude. Because I was a full-on lefty, delusional lefty for like a short period of my life.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? How?
So yeah, I'll tell you. So yeah. I was ignorant in a lot of ways. I just assumed. So your example of learning everything about conservatives from CNN, that was me.
Okay.
I was a grad student at UC Berkeley. I thought what I was told to think about politics. And a lot of it really stemmed from the fact that I was very just secular in general. I grew up grew up in college. I watched a lot of Hitchens and read all his books, and I was a big fan of Richard Dawkins. And I'm a scientist. I believe in truth and the scientific method, and religion is just this dumb thing that we used to do to try to figure out the world, and now we have science and so on and so forth. And
well, that's not very scientific of you, though, is it? Just to dismiss the ethos
it was
entirely.
Not. Well, and this goes back to
but isn't that something that it's one of the manufactured consents we see typically? Not, and yes. I'm still to this day not religious, and I'm deeply suspicious of most of the claims made by religion. But yeah, it is a pretty good backdrop for how human beings have come to reason.
100%.
Like in general, how they've. It's one thing to have a scientific test that you can do. It's another thing to try to figure out what good and evil might be, and the degrees of good and evil as well. And, religion's not the only game in town. Obviously, there's quite a bit of philosophy that deals with that. But it would be like a good scientist wouldn't just dismiss that, right?
Absolutely.
There's quite a bit of evidence there, or not evidence, but there's quite a bit of data there to be analyzed, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, man. As I've sort of gotten out of that world, I think that my method of thinking has become more scientific, as ironic as it is, because during that period, man, I was listening, and this is in no way to blame the professors, but this is just that environment. You're like, religion is dumb, science is the way. And with that sort of comes packaged this elite mentality of, the right is dumb, blue collar, which is ridiculous because, especially in my case, I grew up working construction and all these different odd jobs. And then once I got into the university system, I sort of lost who I was for a while. And then just by way of living life, man, getting out of school, working for money, starting a business, starting a family, all these things, I sort of found my way back to, well, maybe I was an arrogant asshole writing off a lot of these things. And there's a reason for millennia, some of these structures have been in place. And so that's all to just say that during that period of time, I was just one of these people who was like, I vote Democrat. That's what smart people do. That's what my professors have told me. And therefore education, and therefore this and that. And of course that a lot of that has changed for me today, but I see how it happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there's a lot of there's a lot of social pressure there as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
If you're in
Yeah.
academia and you call yourself, I mean, honestly, especially over the past 6 or 7 years now, if you're in academia and you say, like, I don't really care for Trump's attitude and some of the stupid shit he says, but a lot of the policies were very effective. Now, all of a sudden, you're in trouble. You're on the chopping
Yep.
block for simply addressing policy issues, you know what I mean? Which is a very stupid thing to do. And, parts of religion are pretty dumb. The dogmatic nature of it, but the dogmatic nature of irreligion is the same. You know what I mean? That's also
Exactly.
dumb. So
Yeah.
I think the constant attempt by human beings to find their place in the world, to find not only what is right, but how to do it, like how to apply ethical and moral principles across a very disparate landscape, across disparate times and cultures. That's not dumb at all. That's the root of human consciousness, right? And that's how
Yep.
we understand our place in the world. That's got to be something, that's got to be part of the process. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, it is, man. And that's what I've obviously come to realize as I've grown and matured and started to listen to other people instead of just being this pompous prick that I was when I was in grad school and everything. And dude, it's honestly why, and like I said, I'm really just trying to figure this stuff out and navigate life myself. But, we've decided to, for the first time in our lives, attend church because I never did it. And I just wanted to see what it was and what is this all about, right? Like, what is this thing? And there are certainly principles of community and all of the various basic moral tenets that Christianity teaches that are good things, and it's a good potential way to live your life. Right now, I don't think it's necessary to be religious to do those things, but I don't think it hurts, right? In some ways, but the key is to tease apart that from the dogmatic BS that you do see. And so as a father now, I'm like, man, where are the places I can take my daughter and surround her where I can hopefully shield her from some of this postmodernism and critical theory and leftist ideology that is encapsulating the youth, right? And so if the church is it, then so be it, if I can do that. But like I said, man, I'm still trying to figure it all out. And as a parent, it's a whole new set of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that religion has been so successful for so long. I don't necessarily think it's because people are afraid of the afterlife or death or any of that shit. I think it's because of
Right.
the sense of community, kin selection, in group, out group stuff, just wanting to feel like you're part of something and part of something bigger than yourself. I mean, the Mormons have built the fastest growing religion on earth just by being nice, even though
Yeah.
being nice and having a strong family and community base, even though their beliefs are completely insane. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as an intellectual, somebody as a philosopher, as a scientist, you have to be willing to do what Christopher Hitchens used to say, which is to say, keep the good parts and jettison the rest.
Yeah, exactly.
As a matter of fact, that's what Paul said in the New Testament. I believe the phrase was hold fast, study all things and hold fast to what's true. That was the advice. I don't remember who he said that to, Corinthians or Galatians or somebody, one group. At any rate, yeah, that's how a scientist's brain has to work. You can't be discriminatory. All evidence is potential evidence until it's eliminated as potential evidence, right?
Yeah.
And we see these things in religion. Now, how do we recreate these? There's a couple of fucking real problems that we're having. One is that we haven't been able to replicate the sense of community that religion provides outside of religion. And as people in our age group and younger become more and more irreligious, we've lost a great sense of that community. People don't know who their group is anymore. And it's all
Right.
kind of haphazard. And then the other major factor there is something I talked about on our show this week, or on Monday's show for Citizen, is there are no like organized rites of passage for young men anymore. Like they don't understand. There's no process by which a young man, aside from maybe Judaism with the bar mitzvah, but where you're told, here is what it means to become a man, here are your responsibilities as a man, and here's how you do those things. You know what I mean? It just doesn't exist. So you have at large a complete lack of community, and then at the masculine level, you have a bunch of fucking young, aggressive males that don't know what to do with their aggression.
Exactly.
It's a
Yeah,
big
I listened to
problem.
that episode. That was a really good episode, and a great conversation in general between someone who is religious and then yourself who is not, and how you guys found common ground. I really enjoyed that conversation. But I agree with you, man. And I was kind of an example of that, right? I grew up, both of my parents were 16 when I was born. They were both drug addicts. I say were because my dad passed, and I don't know where my mom is, but like I was essentially on my own from super early on, right? And I didn't have any rites of passage. I didn't have anybody to say, okay, here's what being a man is. Here's how you become a man. I sort of fumbled my way through it, and I think did okay in trying to figure it all out. But it was like 16 years old hooking up for the first time. It's like, all right, I guess that makes me a man now. I don't know. Like I'm doing these things. I'm following these primal urges, but it would have been super beneficial to have someone saying, okay, son, here is what makes you a man. Here is what you need to do. And I try to do that a little bit with my content, just because I have a lot of young men reaching out to me, because I talk about masculinity and how this whole negative connotation that we attach to masculinity, and by just calling it all toxic, which they'd like to say that it was no, we're not talking about all of masculinity, but it's like when you start to talk, you're fucking talking about all of masculinity and labeling it toxic. So
Yeah.
really the toxic shit is not masculinity, it's insecurity. And the furthest thing from a masculine protector and provider, that's the toxic shit. But a lot of these young dudes reach out to me and they're like, man, I'm I don't feel like I can be myself at school. My teachers are saying, stuff that goes against how I feel and my nature, and what do I do? And I'm like, dude, you got to keep resisting. And I understand, maybe even saying the thing you think that they want to hear just to get your grade, but knowing that that's the fucking furthest thing from your truth. And I hate that expression, I guess, the truth. But I don't know, man. What is your take on that? Because I feel really conflicted, to bring it back kind of to the institutions and how they're trying to suppress, I don't know if you would call it traditional gender roles,
Mm.
or just masculinity. Um, I, a lot of times I don't know what to tell these guys, except for, dude, just keep being yourself, and resist where you can, but maybe do what you have to get through, and try to pull some others along with you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One, I think resistance is really important. The in the same way that the the bystander effect can be broken instantly by one person's action. You know what I mean? It's like surface tension on water, and you put your finger in it, and all the water runs out. You know what I mean? Resistance, the act of saying no, right? So the man in the arena, you know that photo, right? The
Yeah.
guy where Hitler's giving a speech and he just stands there with his fucking arms at his side. I think that's really important. I think it's important to teach, especially young people, to resist stupid bullshit, because otherwise the same thing that happened to you at university will happen to them, right? And it'll happen younger, and they'll have less of a sophisticated defense against it, and it'll become more ingrained in their brain. I don't think you can do that. I think you have to tell them what's more important than your grade is that you stick to your fucking principles. You know what I mean? So I think Sadahara. Are you familiar with this? This is Sadahara is the idea of passive. Well, it's commonly referred to as passive resistance. It's what Gandhi used to talk about a lot, but there's a lot of misunderstanding around it because passive resistance and Sadahara are not the same thing.
Okay.
So Sadahara essentially in Hindi means that I'm going to do what's right and I'll accept the consequences for it. I'm not going to be violent. but I'm going to do what's right and accept the consequences. That's what it really means. It doesn't mean passive resistance. So he went on to say later on to clarify that passive resistance does not necessarily involve complete adherence to truth under every circumstance. Therefore, it is different from Sadahara in three essentials. Sadahara is the weapon of the strong. It admits of no violence under any circumstance whatsoever, and it ever insists upon truth. Right. So the general idea around this passive resistance movement isn't just sitting somewhere and forcing somebody to drag you out of it or not responding violently. It means I'm going to do what's right regardless of the cost. And that is the lesson I think that we need to learn from this, because over the last 2.5 years or so, we've seen a gradual push from the government to control the way we think, right? And it's called manufacturing consent. And they're trying to control the way we think using social pressure, using economic pressure, using legal pressure, even though they don't necessarily have the right to do that. And you've seen in places where people just say it's just. Well, it's just a mask. It's just forced vaccination, right? And it's this is the sociological parallel of first they came for the socialists and I wasn't the socialist, so I didn't say anything, right? And then so on and so forth. And then they came for me and there was nobody left to stand up. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think this idea of Sadahara is really, really important and something that we should embrace as a culture from all sides. It doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. You should not necessarily be obtuse, but when things are clearly wrong, you have to say no. I don't care what the fucking consequence is. Like this idea that we have of liberty, the thing that America is organized around, it only exists if it exists for everybody and all the time. Right. And that's only possible if a critical mass of Americans refuse to let other people be held hostage to a belief that they don't actually believe, regardless of if they agree with you or not. You know what I mean? It's far more important to protect the free speech of those you disagree with than it is to protect the speech of those you agree with. And that should be your focus.
Exactly. Yeah. As you said that's exactly what I was about to respond with. And another example of that, man, is, so for me, I was never willing to put on a mask. I would never get vaccinated, all of that. And this was all from a very scientific perspective. And that's how I got attacked and whatever, attempted to be canceled and all that dumb shit and lost my job. Is I just talked about the science underlying the efficacy of masks at the community level. And rather the inefficacy. But I talked to so many people that I knew from these scientific circles who were like, and this was once we knew the vaccine isn't truly a sterilizing vaccine in the traditional sense. It doesn't prevent spread in the population. It doesn't protect others from you. It doesn't stop you from getting the virus. Maybe a minimal effect on the magnitude the disease has on you, right? That's it, period. We knew that for fucking a long ass time. Mm-hmm. And I would have conversations with scientists, my former colleagues, and they would acknowledge stuff, dude. Yeah, I know, I get it. It doesn't stop the spread. It doesn't really act as a traditional vaccine, but just get the damn shot. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Just get the shot. And this is exactly what you're talking about. It's like, it was so important to me that, and I've just never understood doing things arbitrarily for the sense of doing them just because someone says so. And I think that that's important with parenting too. Like I hate when parents are like, you just do it because I said so. Like, you can explain to the kid why it's important to do it. And I think, again, that goes back to telling people what to think versus how to think. But it was mind-blowing to me, man, the number of people that I thought were intelligent individuals, PhD scientists, who were just like willing to submit. And they're submitting to people who are far less intelligent than them, right? These dumbass bureaucrats. And it's just like, only to avoid social scorn and resistance. So that concept, like you said, I I forget what it's called. What is it again? The
Sadahara is I
Sadahara.
yeah.
Yeah, that's been so incredibly important these past couple of years, especially.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of the reason it might be well, not anymore, I guess, but it used to be the defining trait of the American population. It's kind of like a fuck you attitude. I'm going to do what I want. And,
Well, that was what I was going to say when you said that we haven't quite uh, created that same feeling of community with religion. I thought maybe this was me being a deluded idealist, but dude, I thought that the closest thing to that was just being an American and all agreeing on these principles that are part of the American experiment. And like the past couple of years, it's when people start to say that I am a Nazi for fucking flying the American flag, man.
yeah.
I'm like, I guess that's not what unites all of us, and we can't even agree on those things. So it's I don't know, it's disheartening in a way, man, because here we are, the most free nation in the world, and our young people are calling it fucking the worst place to live, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll try not to be a pessimist.
No, I mean, it's, that the reality is reality ultimately.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help any of us to pretend things are better or worse than they are. And it's why the conversation between disparate personalities is important, because you've got to put yourself in a position to understand what somebody else is going through, because that's going to tell you what's important to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That to me, from a sociological standpoint, that's the most important thing, is to understand why people feel the way they feel, so we can, do our best to address all those things. But more importantly than that, find the most common intersections that people have. Now we know some of them. The economy is the most important thing. Over 75% of people in every single election vote because of how the economy is doing. So, that is very clearly, and it's not the most important thing because it's the most important thing. It's the most important thing because it is the most important thing to people. You know what I mean? To the most amount of people, actually. And for those that it's not the most important thing to, you got to wonder about that. Like the what struggling family is putting some kind of partisan social issue over the food they have to put on their family's table? That seems unlikely to me, very unlikely. It seems to me like the people who are focused on social issues in particular are typically those who don't have to focus on economic issues. You know what I mean? And you should be very suspicious of people like that, because they're trying to get you to forget about your own needs and your family's needs, and come to their side and talk about fucking microaggressions and shit like that. You know what I mean? You've got time to walk around being offended all day. I'm sorry, man. I've got work to do. That's the real answer to that kind of problem. But it's you should be deeply suspicious of somebody who's trying to capture your attention like that and try to get you to fucking do things that don't necessarily help you or your family.
Yeah, it's like when we were talking last time about it. It's yeah, I can't think of the best way to put it into words, but so for me, I grew up in rural, impoverished northeastern North Carolina, and we lived in a trailer park for a period of time. We were like bouncing back and forth between the trailer park, homeless, crashing on couches, all that stuff. Because like my parents were 16, dude. It was ridiculous, right? And I was one of like two white kids in the whole trailer park. The rest were black and Hispanic. And I've kept in touch with a lot of those dudes. They're like my best friends still. And they are, again, this idea that these actual communities care about these issues, it's preposterous, man. They're like, this defund the police shit is fucking ridiculous.
Mm.
Because when we were growing up around, pill popping shithead adults, we were happy there were police around as kids, right? Like the people in these communities aren't the ones, just like you said, who are pushing this stuff. They think that a lot of this, like the BLM shit. My black friends that I grew up with were some of the most opposed people to the BLM movement. Not the sentiment, right? That Black Lives Matter, but not the movement, rather the organization. They were the first guys who were telling me, "This is bullshit, man. They're just on the take." And most of the arguments I've gotten in with people are white people who grew up upper middle class, and they presume to know what it's like for these people who are growing up in poverty. Or, another example, dude, is welfare. I watched my mom get her food stamps. It was food stamps back then. They didn't have the card that they get now or whatever, but she would get her food stamps and she would sell them for 50 cents on the dollar. So she could take that money and then go buy pills with it. Right. And so it's like, I've seen the abuse of the welfare system. I've seen it. I fucking lived it. And anytime I talk about it, you can count on the fact that these people are going to come after me and call me a bigot and all of this. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm just literally telling you that this happens. This is simply acknowledging reality and acknowledging the things that can happen doesn't make you good or bad. It just makes you someone who's looking at reality. And I think that both left and right make this mistake where as soon as someone starts to talk about the issues and perhaps even put like the smallest inkling of light on something that goes in opposition to their ideology, they attack, right? And the right does it all the time too. When I try to do what you say and talk to people on both sides, which is difficult to do in general when you look like me and you ask somebody on the left to come on your show, but people on the right are like, why would you give them a platform? Why would you talk to that commie, all this stuff? It's like, dude, we have got to start talking to each other. And you can hate me all you want, man, but like they've got to know, for one, that a guy who looks like me isn't a Nazi, right? And people who look like me need to know that someone who is pushing a lot of these ideologies believes they're doing the right thing, right? I think that's the crux of it is the far right and the far left, for whatever reason, can't grasp the fact that the other side is doing what they're doing because they believe it's the right thing. I mean, would you agree to that in general? Like the average person who's fighting for abortion rights or BLM or whatever versus the average person on the right, like they truly believe it's the right thing. They're not trying to be evil, I don't think.
No, I think, yeah, it's Tim Wu talks about this in The Attention Merchants. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like the advertising industry came about by way of first religious and then government propaganda, right? That's how it first started in the 18th century with newspapers and then on into the digital age. But it's like, how can I take this human desire, whatever it happens to be, and turn that into action or dollars? So how can I take people's proclivity to dislike the discomfort of others, to be uncomfortable with others' discomfort, and turn that into something else? Now, it's been done for money, and a lot of different avenues have been used, whether it's sexuality or fear or hope, you know what I mean, or unreasonable promises. All these things have been leveraged against people to, and that's what business is, right? It's identifying a problem and then solving that problem and trying to monetize the solution. That's what it is. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, because that's a service to your community if you're running an ethical business. But if you're a government or some kind of nonprofit, I mean, there's no surprise that you only have to technically spend 2% of your revenue as a nonprofit to maintain your nonprofit status. Like it's
It's insanity, dude.
yeah, for a 501c3, you don't really have to spend that much of the money you take in on the actual cause, legally speaking, in the United States. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's big business. It's big business to leverage people's empathy towards a cause or to steal money from them. Look, religion's done it for years, right? The church has done it for years. Governments have done it for years. And just think about the moralizing arguments you hear from politicians that are trying to tax you more. Like, oh, you don't care about poor people? Like, no, I just think you're a fucking liar and I think you're stealing from me and pretending to help them, but I'm still looking over at this poor community and seeing that they haven't received any actual help. So no, exactly. I don't. I care about poor people. I don't give a fuck about you. You know what I mean? And this is the thing that people have to be suspicious about in government. And it's not enough to call out what you consider to be the other side for that kind of behavior. You have to address it in your own house first. And that's a principle that's in the Bible, but a lot older than the Bible. It's from, I believe, from Confucius, if I'm not mistaken. Like the idea that you clean up your own fucking house first before you start addressing other problems around the area. And we've failed at that, completely failed. Because it's just easier. It's easier to fucking point fingers and blame somebody else than it is to take responsibility for yourself. Because, you know, and I get it to some degree, like this idea that you're not going to, people are worried that if they lose this election or that election, that the world's going to fall apart and everything's going to suck. And, you know, look, this last election doesn't do anything to fucking quell that suspicion. Unfortunately for all of us, this division. So do you remember when Apple used to have 3 phones? When they used to have whatever their phone was, and it would come in like 16 gig, 32 gig, and 128 gig, for example.
Yeah.
Most people, like there's a group of people that will always buy whatever the top one is. But most other people don't want to seem like they're buying the cheapest one, so they buy the middle one. And the middle one is disproportionately priced for the additional storage space. They did this for years. And it relies on a couple of different marketing principles. One, you don't want to have what's called paralysis by analysis. Too many options and people will stop looking and get frustrated and go away and go to a different product. But I don't remember the exact name for this principle in marketing, but it's basically where you offer a Cadillac version, a top tier version, and then you offer a mid tier version and then a shitty version that's unreasonably bad. And everybody will buy the mid tier version and overpay for it because of that. And that's kind of where that's a good analog for the American political system, because the shitty version, I guess, in this scenario is that you can't just not participate, right? The shitty version, I think, is to be black-pilled. Or I guess for some people, the shitty version might be the left or the right, depending. But let's just say in this, for this sake of this argument, the shitty version is the Republican Party, and the mid-tier version is the Democrats, even though I don't like them that much. And the highest tier, which not a lot of people choose, is to be an independent and make up your own mind. You know what I mean? In this scenario, the vast majority of people are going towards whatever they consider to be that mid-tier option, because there's too much risk for the top-tier option. It costs too much. And
that's what I was going to ask. What is that perceived risk of the top tier option? The personal responsibility that comes along with it, or?
Well, I think they weigh the cost. Like, well, what if I vote for an independent, or what if I vote for something
and I throw
else?
my vote away.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. And look, there's no prescription in the Constitution for a 2-party political system. It doesn't. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Why would it be like that? Why would there be 2 options? And why would we even vote based on a party instead of voting on particular, like, specific laws and principles? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that's the way I I've always thought that made the most sense, was just the individual, and you have to decide for yourself what's valuable to you. What do you think is most important at present in terms of issues? Like right now, I think most Americans would agree inflation, various economic issues are at top of mind for most Americans, and I do think that's why we're going to see a lot of Republicans get voted in
Mm.
uh, at midterms. But I think that it's people who just vote are down the line. I mean, they're shitty Republicans like that. That's just such a intellectually like bankrupt way to think, and I it's it's frustrating because it seems like most Americans, when you talk to them as an individual, they agree on most of those points, and then they go and vote D or R, right? And I don't know, I don't know how to fix that, if that's the right way to put it. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think there has been a large movement towards that with the um, decentralization of information,
Mm.
and with shows like this, right? Like, people aren't just watching CNN or Fox News anymore. I mean, most people aren't. Actually, most people are consuming alternative media, which is now just media, in my opinion. It's I think the deregulation of information and who controls that is one of the biggest battles society is fighting right now, right? I think that and you see it all the time with censorship, and I mean, it truly is like the hearts and minds of people at stake, because if you can manipulate that flow of information, you win. um, so I think things are heading in the right direction in that regard, and I don't know, man. It seems to me like the institutions, the sort of relics of the past, whether it's the CNN and Fox News type large media corporations, or just these um, uh, conventional politicians, whatever you would call it, like your traditional like Nancy Pelosi types. It's like they're on their last breath, and they're fighting as hard as they can to maintain control, and it's slipping away. I don't know if you have that same general feeling, and I think it's because of this type of stuff,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
This was, you know,
It's part of it. I mean, I think the general public, a lot of the general public is starting to wake up to the fact that Republicans and Democrats don't really represent conservative and liberal ideologies anymore. You know what I
that's
mean?
true. Yeah, absolutely.
I think, what we probably need is some sort of collective effort to challenge individuals, to challenge themselves, to ask some specific questions. Like, when was the last time the Republican Party did something conservative? Because what I've seen over the past 20 years are wars of conquest and nation building, and the largest expansion of the federal government in history, an expansion of the police state and the surveillance state, and all this bullshit. And then when's the last time the left accomplished their goal of taking care of people as a classical liberal would, recommend? Obamacare is a handout to insurance companies. They fucked
Yep.
people up. They fucked up our entire look. Our healthcare wasn't great before. Now it's way worse than it was before. 83% of all privately filed bankruptcy claims are because of unpaid medical expenses. Right? We live in the richest country in the history of the goddamn world, and we tell people they can be as healthy as they can afford to be. That is immoral. Hard stop. That is immoral. Like, we can figure out how to solve that problem, but the way we've chosen to solve it from the right and from the left is wrong. So, if you organize yourself around a political party or a politician, you're going to fail ultimately as a citizen. You can't do that because people will fuck up, and parties are nothing but people. Principles are the only solution to this problem. It is literally the only way to solve any of this stuff, is to get people rooted in principle again, instead of having popularity contests.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a great document that outlines a lot of principles that this nation was founded on. And it's like that has been stigmatized, right? As being, if you start talking about freedom and liberty in the Constitution, you're immediately labeled a right winger, by whoever, right?
Well, I mean, you got to have the temerity to challenge that idea. Explain
exactly.
to me, explain to me, and I'm not, this is rhetorical. I'm not asking you to, but explain to me exactly why my personal liberty confers to you some kind of sense of far right ideology. Like,
Exactly. None of it makes
are you
sense.
anti-liberal? I mean, you have to have the conversation though. You have
Right.
to let it play out, because that's the only way to solve that issue, is to challenge people on the stupid shit they say.
Yeah, and
Like,
I think that's a great approach, though. The just to highlight what you just did, ask that rhetorical question and just kind of sit back and see what they say, because sometimes that's a good way to get people thinking instead of just aggressively challenging them, like just making a point, because they'll
yeah,
just try to make a counterpoint. You know what
right.
I mean? Just ask that rhetorical question and see what they say.
You're a
Because
lot better off asking questions than you are trying to make points, for
right,
sure.
exactly. Yeah, I agree. And that's why I call my show Free Mind. I think that being an individual who's principled and has taken the time to actually think about why you should do things a certain way, and what you're trying to achieve in the future, and really stopping this cycle of being told what to think, and actually learning how to think is the only answer. And I love what you've done with developing the principles for Citizen. And the problem, though, is that there are many of us. Andy says personal excellence is the ultimate form of rebellion, right? Like Andy Frisella, that's one of his phrases, and I agree with that. And that's why I'm big on I developed the 6 principles for how to be in your best physical shape and all this stuff, to try and like boil it down to very easy things for people, because I do think that is the answer. But then you have to somehow still make that work in this fucked up political system we have. Right. So that's the, I mean, I guess, do you think there will ever be a time where an independent or a libertarian even is actually elected to a major office?
No.
So why?
Because I don't think we're there yet. It's like this place is broken, and it's I believe it needs a complete rebuild, and I don't think just electing some other person from some other party is going to be a solution to that. I think it's
When you say rebuild, though, I mean, what do you mean by that? Right.
I don't think that our political system works. I don't think that any political system scales indefinitely. You know what I mean? So the idea of federalism only works to the point where, one, people will enforce it, and two, the government, the centralized federal government, isn't strong enough to overcome it. And we're well beyond both of those. So I don't think the idea of federalism is certainly salvageable, but there's going to be some pain between now and then, frankly, is what I believe.
Right.
But
Right.
just like in any other, and what we're in is a social insurgency at this point, right? Because there's a lot of institutional power from government, not just the politicians, but the unelected bureaucrats who are making decisions behind the scenes, and in the confluence of that institutional power with corporate power, and then global corporate power as well. These people hold the purse strings, and they control the media. So it's going to be difficult without some sort of inoculation against it. And the only inoculation against that is one-on-one and small group conversations that go something like this. As a liberal, what is it that you hold dear in the political system? What is it that you think we should be accomplishing? And the answer is probably going to be something like social welfare, to make sure people have equal access to potential success, to have equal liberty, equal representation, so on and so forth. And most reasonable people would nod their head and be like, yeah, I agree with that. Now, how do we do that? Well, we're going to have government programs. Let me stop you right there, bud. No, because the government has shown itself to be incompetent. So how do we empower the individual to do these things, right, at the lowest possible level, from the community level? Because it's more flexible. The money gets spent more efficiently, and the person gets more individual attention. Like, we all want smaller classrooms for our kids for that reason. Why don't we apply this at an economic level? And I think there's conversations to be had there that don't include, hey, you're a fucking libtard or you're a Nazi Republican because you've done nothing. Or saying, no, I think social welfare is fucking stupid. So we're not even going to have the conversation. Okay, cool. You just took your ball and went home like a little bitch because you didn't have the fucking balls to, or the temerity, or I guess the Constitution to learn the issue, to be able to have a decent human adult conversation about it and come to some kind of fucking reconciliation.
Right.
And that is something that's going to take place outside of government. And then government will, as they are doing right now, as you alluded to before, try to grip even tighter because they can feel it slipping away. And that's where the pain's going to come in, because people, they're going to do exactly what they did during COVID, which is fire people and use social pressure and all this other economic pressure and bullshit to try to get you to conform to what they want you to do. And you can't do it. Whatever the cost, you can't do it. So things, unfortunately, probably have to get bad enough where a critical mass of people are going to say no, not just a select few. And that's kind of how I feel about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. I think the solutions are in the area in between, and those of us who are willing to have conversations. And when you were talking about social welfare, and so, I don't know if we're going over, you can stop me at any point, bro. But most conservatives I know, they probably be labeled far right by the media or whatever. They give charitably and give to charities to help their community. So they generally support this idea of social welfare and helping others in the community. And where they have the problem is when you just, like you said, start talking about government programs and appropriating their money by some idiot who doesn't know where to apply it properly and is going to embezzle funds. And so if you can just get those people talking to each other, right? Like they're going to agree on a lot of stuff, because at the end of the day, we're all humans with the same sort of hardware and software, right? And it's frustrating. And again, that's why I like your message and what you're doing and the people you're bringing on and talking to, because the Pandora's box of the internet and social media and the decentralization of messaging and media can't be closed, right? Like it's open now. And I mean, you see it, dude, with like Rogan getting 10 times the viewers as CNN and CNN Plus failing and all these things happening. And, you know, I only use that example because it's one that I know of, but the same shit happens with these institutional media outlets on the right, you know, and I think it's more of just doing what we're doing, and it might take a while and it'll be painful, and there are going to be times when I forgot the phrase again, fucking what you said earlier about Gandhi, but that's going to be very necessary for people. And I didn't want to end this in like a negative way. So I want people to have some hope, because I do think that things are heading in the right direction with stuff like this, at least.
I mean, I don't think it's intrinsically negative. I just think,
yeah,
it is what it is, right? Like sometimes you got to rip the fucking Band-Aid off, and you're not going to do it just like a drug addict isn't going to ask for help until they hit rock bottom. And I don't think we've hit rock bottom yet. As bad as things appear to be right now, I don't think we're even close to as bad as what it could be. And
what do you think rock bottom looks like for us?
Probably in the American system of government, something like what's going on in Canada right now. Gun confiscation, people's finances being fucked with because of their political beliefs and stuff like that. I think Canada is at rock bottom right now, and I fully expect some kind of escalation soon.
Do you fear, like, I don't know if it's unfounded, but I worry so much about the incompetence of our administration when it comes to foreign affairs and this Ukraine-Russia shit and the possibility of actual nuclear action being taken. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's, I don't know enough about it.
No, I don't worry about that.
You don't worry about that. Okay.
No, I mean, there isn't, frankly, unless somebody was able to smuggle something in there, we have the ability to stop pretty much any kind of missile that comes towards us. right? But as crazy as Russia is sometimes, the principle of mutually assured destruction has gotten us through much worse situations than we're in right now. They don't want to fucking get evaporated off. Like we have quite a bit more nukes and better placed Jupiter missiles and shit like that than they do. Same for China. Like we could annihilate everybody if we wanted to. I don't worry too much about that.
So this stuff about the is it hypersonic? Is it missile technology? Essentially, it's been fired off and it's well on its way to us before we even realize it happened. And us having the inability to detect that in time, that's not something that's possible.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if it's hypersonic.
Yeah, hypersonic's right. Yeah, it's technically possible, but we would launch like 7,000 nukes at every major city in China and Russia immediately after that, and there's nothing they could do to stop it. So I don't think like the consequences are too high, in my opinion, for something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. It's just something I worry about, and I know that if I worry about it, I'm sure other people subscribe to some of the fear mongering that's out there. So
I don't worry too much about America being attacked, and I think foreign countries understand that they can't attack America, and that's why they use the tactics they do. Like you don't see us trying to convince Russian dudes to wear dresses and fucking cut their dicks off. But they're definitely trying to convince us to do that, while they and China are both trying to convince their dudes to not do stupid bullshit like that, to be more manly.
They have masculinity training. Yeah dude.
You can tell.
Yeah, okay.
You can tell how an enemy fears you based on the way they attack you, and they attacked us at the social level and not the military level because they know they can't beat us in the other one. You know what I mean?
Well, they're having some success on the social level, I think.
Quite a bit of success, unfortunately. Yeah. But, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So hopefully people will wake the fuck up. We'll see. Thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say to the audience before we get out of here?
No, just Free Mind Podcast. If you're interested in more incoherent ramblings by a dude like me, bringing guests on and talking about this stuff. And I appreciate you having me on, dude.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate you coming, and I appreciate you all for listening. This has been Citizen.